Oh, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and great to see so many people here. At least I think that when you're up here, the lights, I can vaguely see you from where I'm standing. My name is Nick Earle. I run our global field operations for Hyperloop One. And as a European, because I'm based in London, I am really delighted to welcome you all to today's event. Not only the people in the audience, the teams that are here, but the ministers from across Europe, honourable guests, thank you so much for being here. As a European, I know, and certainly one that travels around the world, that Europe has always been a leader in mobility. We've been a leader in mobility in the digital world. In Northern Europe, we've been a leader in physical mobility. We were obviously a very early leader in trains and multiple intermodal capabilities between transport systems that really make Europe's transport networks the envy of the world. But what we're going to talk about today, what we're going to describe to you, what we're actually going to show you is what we believe is the next mode of transportation. The first new mode of transportation since the airplane in 1903. We're not talking about an incremental improvement of an existing mode. It's not a train, it's not a car, it's not a spaceship. It's something entirely new consisting of components from many different systems integrated together to create a totally new experience. It's not just about going fast from A to B. Yes, that is one of the features, and in fact, it's the thing that gets the headline news. But we fundamentally believe this will transform society. It will actually change how you design cities. It will change where you live and where you work. If 300 kilometers becomes 30 minutes, where would you live? How would you design a city? How would you design economy? What would the role of your country be in terms of being a connectivity hub for the future economy? Now, I have to confess, and the next speaker also would make the same confession, Rob Lloyd, who's our CEO, that some of us feel like we've seen this before. Although it's new, we've seen it before. So I want to just, before I introduce Rob, leave you with an analogy which we believe will become true. And that is that when the internet first came about, and I say that because Rob and I both came from Cisco, I remember when the internet first came about, it was, especially broadband. And we said, isn't it great? Finally I get fast download speeds of a web page, or even we could download a film in less than 4 hours for the first time. We don't talk about broadband like that anymore. The speed is not the issue anymore. What we talk about is how broadband changed business processes, how it changed companies, how it created new industries, how it enabled massive disruption, and how there were winners and losers. But if you think about broadband, at the heart of it is a network that has digital packets that go very fast. 3 types of packets: data, voice, and video, switching and routing. If you think about Hyperloop, at the heart of it is a network with 3 types of physical packets: packets of people, packets of freight, packets of cars that can all go on a very fast pipe or connection that can go first mile to last mile in an autonomous way with routing and switching. We believe that this is as significant as the internet. We believe it's the emergence of physical broadband, and if we're right, that is going to have massive implications on people's lives, the way we live, the way we work, countries, cities, and economies. So that's what we hope to go through in the next 90 minutes. We've got a great agenda for you. We'll have a panel later on to end the morning. But in the meantime, it's my pleasure to introduce my manager, the CEO of Hyperloop One, Rob Lloyd. Rob, please come up.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much, Nick. And it's, for me, a little bit like coming home to be here in Amsterdam. I spent 8 wonderful years with my very young family in Europe, traveling in Europe. Our corporate offices were here in Amsterdam. We had many thousands of people here. I was here regularly having meetings, and I know that my team from Hyperloop has immensely enjoyed the hospitality, the richness, the diversity of the past few days in Amsterdam. And I'd just like to thank all our hosts who have been so gracious here and made us feel so much at home. It's been a pleasure and a little bit of a homecoming for me, having spent 8 years working in Europe previously, as Nick had mentioned. It's also interesting for us because it's not an unnatural thing for European governments, for European citizens, for businesses to actually think of investments in infrastructure as something that's the right thing to do, that's the good thing to do. And you've led so many endeavors in mobility. You just look around, even from where we stand today in Amsterdam, Europe's largest port, some of the most amazing airports that have led to efficient transportation, that have led to economic development, that aren't questioned as enablement of a better life. And as Nick mentioned, as we think of a new mode of transportation, a new kind of infrastructure that could significantly remove the barriers of time and distance and really change how labor markets work, how our lives and relationships can be developed and maintained, this really is something that I think will have significant impact in the next decades and decades ahead. I hope we'll all look back to this meeting and say, we were in Amsterdam when we listened to those Hyperloop people talking about this idea, because I think it's a big idea, and we're very proud as a company that's only a startup that we've been able to achieve as much as we have in the past 2.5 years. So Europe, 25% of all research and development in Europe is in transportation. You can see that with some of the great companies that have been formed here. This is an area where 4 of the top 8 countries in the world for infrastructure and advanced infrastructure are European countries. The ability of us to organize new ideas in public-private partnerships, forming capital, operating arrangements, partnerships with governments that will allow us to do something different than may not be entirely on the current agenda, is actually very natural, a very natural thing for us to see evolving in many European countries. And obviously this commitment to high speed rail, very efficient highways and infrastructure that have led to a key underpinning of the competitiveness of the European economy. An example. This is a great example where some of the benefits that we believe from connectivity have been demonstrated. The Øresund bridge and tunnel connecting Denmark to Sweden, a big project, over €4 billion. economic benefits, well exceeding that at €7 billion. 6 times increase in the number of commuters that move between Denmark and Sweden. And a tremendous impact in jobs, job creation from a more efficient regional economic hub. The ability of Hyperloop to create labor markets and knowledge markets that we believe will lead to tremendous job creation is unequivocal in our mind, and I think this transportation project is a good example of that. We spent some time with KPMG, good partner of ours, great analyst to look at transportation around the world, and clearly identified that Europe is one of the top opportunities to apply our technology. A large population, a mobile population, where 52,000 kilometers of transportation corridors exist, but yet only 50% of the population are adequately served, in which we have robust cargo movements, mostly from east to west, but in which logistics, cargo, and efficient movement of goods is a fundamental of economic development and competitiveness. So this, for us, is one of the largest opportunities for us to examine the ability to apply our technology as a startup that's emerging and moving so quickly, and we're very, very honored and pleased that you're all here to join us in this discussion. So what is Hyperloop? Imagine we start with a tube, we remove most of the pressure from that tube, which removes resistance, we build a vehicle on top of that that could contain passengers or cargo. We then create a linear electric motor that's used to propel that vehicle, and as a result, with low friction, magnetic levitation, an all-electric motor with no emissions and no noise, we can go very, very quickly. And you'll hear some of the examples of Hyperloop use cases that were developed with many of the participants in the Global Challenge. That core technology, which has been developed by Josh Geigel, President of Engineering, and co-founder of our company, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, who has attracted and organized some of the most brilliant minds in the world to move as quickly as we have, can allow us to do several things. We can move sea containers from ports very quickly and get them off the trucks that sometimes clog our streets. We can move passengers and light cargo between cities and airports. And we can move packages or components between factories in building a new, more virtualized and efficient manufacturing infrastructure. So all of those use cases of this technology will be part of the roadmap, and we thought, how many people around the world could think of problems to solve in deploying the concept of Hyperloop? And that's one of the reasons we're here. The other key differentiator is Hyperloop technology is on demand. We have some very efficient train systems connecting cities in Europe, but there's a schedule. You know, you've got to be there at 7:52. You have to take a trip across the city to get to train stations, which fortunately are in the center of most European cities. We're on demand. There is no schedule. We're moving much smaller units of freight or passengers. And when it's time to go to the airport or time to go to the next city, that's when the vehicle leaves. So think of this as on demand. Secondly, think of this as a packet on the internet where we only stop at the final destination. Instead of moving 600 people in a train set, all lined up on a train platform, boarding at the same time, we may load 24, 48 people in a smaller vehicle, and it will only stop at the destination that we're going to. So along the way, there could be different routes. We could stop at the city center multiple times, go to the airport, but if I don't want to stop at the airport and keep going, only my vehicle will stop at my final destination. So this idea of point to point and still an inclusive transportation network is a very, very important differentiator. Smaller units stopping only at their final destination, which makes it much more efficient than a metro system, much more fast than high-speed rail, which has to stop and unload and load at every one of its destinations. And then multimodal. We have to connect to the airports. We have to connect to the train stations. We have to connect to the busy metro stations. And think of Hyperloop as an incremental mode, not one that replaces today's modes, but incrementally adds this high-speed backbone and capacity so that cars are the last mile, trains still have purposes for both passengers and cargoes, airports continue to connect all of us over distances, but between 50 and 1,000 kilometers, we see a sweet spot for this new backbone of high-speed transport connecting other modes of transportation. So much so, one of the things that we always are asked is, how's this compare to high-speed rail? I say simply, 2/3 the cost, 3 times the speed, and up to 4 times the economic benefit. You'll hear from some of our people in some of our cases exactly why we feel that way. I was just asked, how big is this company? Folks, we're a startup. We were in a garage in January of 2015. Josh Geigel is our co-founder, a brilliant engineer you'll hear from shortly. He joined us on November 2nd, 2014, and began to think through and validate the original ideas of Elon Musk, which were published in a white paper given to the world to open source, and our company was formed primarily and fundamentally to pursue that idea and make it a commercial reality. We've raised $160 million of capital. We have attracted some of the biggest partners in the world, some of the most brilliant board members, but all of this started in a garage just outside in one of the small boroughs of Los Angeles. Today we have a brilliant team. I'll let Josh share with you some of the capabilities that he's attracted in this pursuit of making something happen so quickly and so definitively that it seems impossible. And the idea of Hyperloop is something that seems incredible, up to 1,100 kilometers an hour, going between cities and opening up both cargo and passenger transport modes, but it isn't impossible. And in fact, we are 100% certain that the engineering will be delivered and demonstrated to the world in the next few months. And I'll let Josh go through some of that methodology that he's used to get us there. But today, a fantastic team. Some great partners. You'll recognize some of these companies, many of them European-based, who have partnered with us, have partnered on projects, are part of an advisory board that we rely on, just visited us and spent 3 days with us last week in Los Angeles, are considering safety, certification process. What do you need to do to have a government certify the technology when there is no Hyperloop regulation? In fact, we need to create and write a Hyperloop regulation, not in an adversarial way, but in a collaborative way. And so the entire reason we're here today is to feature those projects that have been sponsored by governments and brought to our attention in a global challenge in which we think governments want this to happen. They don't want to prevent us from making this happen. They're trying to encourage and collaborate with us, and we will collaborate in the creation of new regulations and safety certifications to introduce this technology, because regulation is important, but we can't let it occur in the way in which things would just occur if we let them happen naturally. We want to create a new mode of creating regulations, and that's part of why we're here today. Our facilities, we do our primary research in our Los Angeles research campus. We've just expanded that from 55,000 square feet to 76,000 square feet over a 3.5-acre campus, an ability to have up to 500 employees now operating and developing the core technology. In August last year, we opened 100,000 square foot. My colleagues can help me convert that to square meters. I'm not sure I can. I'm assuming it's 11,000. So just move on. Okay. It's a 100,000 square foot facility where we began the process of fabricating the Hyperloop components, building the methodology that we'll build locally. This isn't some US company that's going to come in and build infrastructure. We're going to come in and innovate along with governments, creating innovation hubs, delivering much of the jobs and economic advantage, innovation advantages that will come from being first movers. That's a plant that helps us detail the methods that we'll be using to manufacturing this technology in countries around the world. And today's topic is about the world's first Hyperloop. Our company's fundamental focus as an organization has been to prove to you that this works. And this test facility that we call DevLoop, or the development loop, just outside of Las Vegas, I'll let Josh Geigel tell you more about that, because it's very exciting to see what we've done in a very short period of time. But until we show you and prove that it works, it's just a theory. We're not here to talk about PowerPoint, we're here to talk about real engineering. We're not here to talk about some idea that we think is decades off, but something that we believe we can start in partnership with countries in 2018, and something that we think we could have in production in the next 5 years. Moving cargo first, passengers second by 2021. That's the mission of our company, and you'll see how quickly we've moved to make that a reality. We have a number of projects that are underway in various stages of development, studying the impact of Hyperloop here in the Netherlands, studying the impact of freight movement in Los Angeles, the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. 40% of the US containers come through that port. If you've happened to visit Los Angeles, the result of that is our traffic is in gridlock. These containers are on the roads, and you can hardly drive a car. We've done studies of container movements from the port of Jebel Ali in Dubai. We've partnered with the regulator in Dubai called the Road and Transport Authority to understand how we could build a prototype of this technology in Dubai, and are partnering with others in the Middle East and Gulf region. And of course, we've started our first study, and our partners in that study are here today in Finland, that began with the idea of building a route from Helsinki to Stockholm under the Åland Islands, leveraging some of the abilities to incorporate our technology in a tunneled environment. Those are some of the early projects, but we're very, very proud that we don't have all the best ideas. And our company was formed to bring engineers together from around the world that could make this a reality. But 1 year ago, in Las Vegas, when we demonstrated one of our first component tests, we asked the world, what's your idea? Where should we build the Hyperloop? Can you give us some of your thoughts? And we had 26,000 teams registered over the subsequent months and said, we have some ideas. Hundreds of them submitted their ideas. We actually saw ministries of transport, we saw engineering firms, we saw universities, we saw individuals, architectural firms submitted their ideas as to where Hyperloop made sense, and we had the difficult requirement to bring that down to a number of semi-finalists that we announced, which was 35. This is the third of 3 global sessions we've conducted. One was in New Delhi, one was in Washington, D.C., and today we're very proud to feature, and you've seen some of them as you entered here today, some of the creativity, some of the great ideas that have come from an open source, bottoms up, collaborative approach to where are the best ideas. And some of those ideas I'd like to feature right now. First of all, 9 of them came from the UK. These countries all represented. In total, 44 cities would be connected, 75 million people would be touched, and over 5,000 kilometers of routes in their entirety were represented by the ideas of these submissions. I'm going to highlight a few, but not all of them, and I wondered if you could join me right now in expressing our appreciation, my appreciation to all of the teams that submitted their ideas. They're fantastic. I only have time to highlight a few of them, but could I ask you to join me in a round of applause for all of those teams that entered? The fantastic work, and thank you very much. Let me give you a couple of examples. Almost themes, not routes. Let's spend some time after this session with the teams that are here, and they're with us today in the room, but themes, not specifically the routes. Wrocław to Warsaw. Wrocław, sort of a high-tech hub. Warsaw, a very mature city, but one that is really plagued with congestion. What if we made those 2 markets, the labor, the capabilities, very much more connected? Or take a look at the connection in the 3 capitals in the UK, Edinburgh, London, Cardiff. What if we could connect those capitals together in a more efficient way, where real estate prices in the north of England are really becoming a problem compared to the real estate prices in the south of England? The theme that we see between these two projects is economic unification. We can make it fair for anyone to get a job anywhere, leverage different housing prices, leverage their homes, leverage where great universities are located, and make it fair for everyone to get a job and not have to move home to where it may be unaffordable for an individual to pursue their career because they can't afford to move to a place where their house is 1/5 the price of the destination they're moving to. And that's a theme we see in Helsinki. It's a theme we see around the world, but making economies more efficient by connecting cities and then making it more equitable for people to pursue their careers. The second is changing literally how countries are connected and taking a look at the opportunity of moving the Baltic region from Estonia to Helsinki. I didn't know this, but thousands, millions of people take the ferry across from Tallinn to Helsinki and work and live in those two countries. Millions a year, and they primarily take a ferry. It's not a great distance, but if the European Union builds a tunnel for cars and trains, I sure hope we put a Hyperloop in there so that the journey is just a couple of minutes, and I think it would create a super region in the Baltic area. And then take a look at some of another submission we have. We also have, I believe, joining us today, the Minister of Transportation from Corsica, Sardinia, where you have a beautiful place where tourism and ferry travel is fundamentally the way in which people move, but it takes days to move across this beautiful area. What if we can move beyond ferries, create super regions and create a tourist opportunity for Corsica, Sardinia, which perhaps is not possible today, by introducing anywhere in this beautiful place in 40 minutes and connecting Tallinn to Helsinki in 8 minutes. Alan would tell me 6. I added 20% just for contingency. What about in Germany? I think of Germany, we've all driven on the Autobahn, fantastic road system. It even scares some of us that we don't go close to the left 2 lanes. We always stay to the right, as North Americans restricted to 55 miles an hour. But what an infrastructure that has really changed the accessibility between those cities. What if we built a Hyperloop right over top of the Autobahn? What if we started from Hamburg to Berlin? The opportunity to use an existing right-of-way, provide alternate energy sources, maybe solar energy on top of that infrastructure, and the idea of reusing and recapitalizing on existing roadways, which is a common theme we see in Hyperloop around the world, is a great idea, and I commend the team here for transforming the Autobahn into potentially the next great green superconnector. And other ideas like that, I think, are forthcoming. And then finally, in Spain, I've had a chance to meet a number of the representatives here, government fully in supportive of the fact that cargo movements that move from North Africa, from Morocco, across the Strait of Gibraltar, in sea containers, and then likely on trains or trucks to serve the great markets in Spain of Madrid and Barcelona. What if we could create a Hyperloop to move just sea containers? Or what if we, here in Holland, in the Netherlands, could create a great loop between Europe's largest port, Rotterdam, to this 4th largest port, Amsterdam, to the support and distribution and logistics areas in Eindhoven, and actually create a great logistics hub. This is a country of worldwide logistics expertise. And that's one of the reasons we've seen the economic development here far exceed the size of the population and the size of the country. To continue to move that idea forward, I think, is something that is a great, great opportunity, and you'll hear more about what we believe is the opportunities here in the Netherlands. So in summary, if we had been on the beach in North Carolina in 1903 and seen the first plane take off, would you have imagined that it would have led to the A380, these super buses flying across the ocean? Would you imagine that we would not have had some fear to imagine that our families would have gotten flown across the Atlantic in these planes. That was the beginning of the last great mode of transportation that we know today as the aircraft. And we think we're at the very beginning of the next great mode of transportation, known as Hyperloop. We think that beginning will occur in 2017. And you'll hear more about that today. So in summary, we've always found that Europe embraces new ideas, always striving for innovation, has always valued infrastructure, collaboration, and working together in a public-private partnership. We're very, very excited to be here. We're proud to have many of the attendees that have joined us. And this idea is real. It's happening now. And you hear more about that today, not only here, but from our participants at the Hyperloop One Global Challenge. I'd like to thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much. Now, to demonstrate that enthusiasm and support for new ideas, innovation, forward thinking, I am absolutely honored to welcome on stage a special guest, Minister of Infrastructure and the Environment from the Netherlands, Minister Melanie Schultz van Hagen. Melanie, please join me. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends from California, from all over Europe, fellow Hyperloop enthusiasts, welcome to the Netherlands and welcome to Amsterdam. My country is proud to be hosting this Hyperloop One Challenge showcase event. Proud because the Netherlands want to lead the world when it comes to innovative and sustainable mobility. And proud because the Netherlands is the perfect partner to help take the Hyperloop forward. And I'd like to thank Hyperloop One for coming to the Netherlands and inviting me to share my vision on Hyperloop and innovative mobility. And what began in 2013 as a white paper by Elon Musk is really starting to take shape. Pods are being developed around the world. Hyperloop One has a pod and a tube in Nevada, and I have no doubt that technology will be proven. But the profitable business case is equally important. And that's why you are here today and tomorrow. Today, we will hear about the technology and the developments that are taking place. And tomorrow, the participants in the Hyperloop Challenge will present their business cases. And I'd like to congratulate all participants on getting this far. It's great to see countries from all over the world represented. And I'm very, very excited to hear about all the entries. And all the ingredients for success are here: vision, determination, a competitive edge, not forgetting your enthusiasm, which is almost tangible. It's like we're preparing to run a marathon and we know we're going to be the first to complete it in under 2 hours. And you've noticed, I share your enthusiasm. Elon Musk's approach and competition fascinate me, as does the approach of Hyperloop One and this business case challenge. It's generating ideas and momentum for the Hyperloop concept. Also, our guys from Delft, winners of the last competition in California, have inspired me to look further ahead. And ladies and gentlemen, a new era of mobility has begun, as Rob Lloyd was already telling us. In the next 20 years, we will see more changes than we've seen in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, the car and the plane joined the ranks of the ship and the train and bike. And today, we cannot imagine life without them. They've continued to develop, but they may not be around forever. The new era has dawned, with self-driving cars, platooning trucks, drones that can transport people. 10 years ago, who would have imagined that cars would stay in lane automatically and park themselves? That we'd be doing trials with truck platoons across Europe? Or that we'll be testing self-driving cars in the center of Amsterdam and on our own motorways? And we're seeing ever more advanced apps that guide travelers from A to B, regardless of the mode of transport. Mobility is becoming a service. Soon we will be able to summon a self-driving car whenever we want. And I even believe that today's preschoolers to not need a driving license in the future. And Hyperloop is another one of these previously unimaginable developments. And I'm keen to see if we can keep up the pace, because if it's so, we'll be using Hyperloop very soon indeed. The year 2021 was mentioned already. And I'm proud that the Netherlands is seen as a trendsetter in this area. I want us to remain Europe's #1 country for sustainable and innovative mobility. I want us to become the global #1. We want to be the smart mobility center of the world. And of course, the Netherlands is already a major player in global logistics. We can see our country as the gateway to Europe. Our infrastructure is among the top 3 in the world. The other 2 are Singapore and Hong Kong, small city-states. And our infrastructure is not alone among the top 3 in the world, but we have the 2 main ports. The port of Rotterdam, which is the biggest port in Europe. Schiphol Airport, which is a very big airport for such a small country. And in Brainport Eindhoven, you will find innovation giants like Philips, ASML, TomTom, as well as many, many startups. And in the Westland area, you will find Greenport. It's the world's 2nd biggest exporter of agricultural products and a world leader in green scientific research. So not so bad for such a small country. So main port, Brainport, Greenport, Hyperport. I would like that too. I'm certainly up for the challenge. And I will give it to you straight. The Netherlands has every reason to encourage innovative mobility. If we don't, our country will grind to a halt. Traffic jams are growing, as are the number of passengers on public transport, especially on routes in and between our major cities. So we also need to reduce our carbon emissions, also a very big issue for the Netherlands. So we need new concepts to keep the Netherlands moving, concepts that are smarter than laying more asphalt and expanding existing infrastructure. And Hyperloop, to my concern, could be the game changer. Fast, quiet, innovative, sustainable. Thanks to solar panels, the Hyperloop promises to be the only net positive energy transportation system. And imagine boarding in Amsterdam, putting on a seatbelt like on a plane, arriving in the center of Groningen or Enschede or Maastricht 10 minutes later, with no taxiing or waiting around. Hyperloop would offer our country unknown possibilities. But it starts with running tests. Hyperloop One, the Dutch Hyperloop team HART, and the new teams of students from Delft University of Technology have all asked for a test track in the Netherlands. And last week I opened Europe's first Hyperloop test facility at Delft University of Technology. But that's only 30 meters long. In Nevada, Hyperloop One has a 500-meter test track. And now you are looking to build a real large test track, 15 kilometers test track, which could even perhaps be expanded to 50 kilometers. And I can tell you that I'm doing a study to assess the possibilities of building this in the Netherlands. I'm looking at a range of issues, including the technology, costs, spatial planning, and opportunities for the Dutch economy. And it might be possible to build it near Lelystad, right at the heart of the Netherlands. And I can even imagine, after successful tests, extending the track to Schiphol, 55 kilometers away. That's an interesting prospect, because from 2019, certain charter flights will be using Lelystad Airport rather than Schiphol. And a Hyperloop would let us create a single, integrated airport. Someone who needs it. And it would take 4 minutes to travel between the 2 locations instead of the current 45. So I'm very excited, but talks to form a new government, as you know, in the Netherlands are ongoing at the moment. So depending on the speed of these talks, it's me who is going to do the final decision, or my successor. But either way, we are studying on it, we're taking it very, very serious. And that said, a test track would be very interesting prospects for the Netherlands. We already have first-class, world-class test facilities for air and space industries, as well as for water management, autonomous driving and drone technologies. All of them are already seated here in the Netherlands. Boeing already uses our wind tunnel, and we're very pleased to have them, because you see that technological breakthroughs are always an interesting prospect. Aerospace spin-offs, for instance, are the source of many new opportunities and jobs. So I'd like to invite Hyperloop One and every other innovative competitor from the Netherlands and beyond to engage with us and explore the possibilities. The Netherlands and its companies can assist with safety cases, with certification. Made in Holland is an internationally recognized guarantee of safety. And I'm also working on adapting Dutch law so that they encourage innovation. Rob, you were also talking about that. You said we need Hyperloop regulation. Well, I think that we need in the Netherlands a single mobility act, because we don't need all the different laws that we know at the moment. They are always old-fashioned after you agreed on them, because you don't know what new technologies will enter the market. So I think we need to create a single mobility act which gives all room and possibilities for new technologies. And in that way we won't have to make new legislation each time for each new type of transport, and we don't have to make exemptions every time. We want the mobility to be really and truly a service, so it could be easier if you have one mobility act instead of different laws, especially apply to one type of mobility. Standardization, open access, open source are my priorities. We mustn't have different systems or tube diameters in every country. California gives us the vision and the man on the moon ambition. I think it's very, very important. And I'm impressed with the ambition and the drive and the confidence of Hyperloop One and the Hyperloop One team, starting in a garage, as you showed us, and now already having competitions all over the world. And I'm glad to say that California and the Netherlands share a close bond. We share the same can-do mindset. Unfortunately, we also have highly populated areas, and we are responsible for a lot of carbon emissions, but we also share a commitment to doing something about it, including true sustainable mobility. And more, California and the Netherlands are becoming partners in innovation, and a healthy mix of competition and cooperation is important. Cooperation between businesses, but also between businesses and government authorities. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to wish you and all of the participants the best luck for tomorrow, of course the Dutch entry as well. I hope that all attendees take the hyper-positive energy that they're experienced in Amsterdam back home with them. And I'm convinced that the Hyperloop will benefit from competitions like these. Competition is good for innovation, good for business, and ultimately good for consumers. And I'm keen to see the progress we are going to make, and hopefully thanks to a test track in the Netherlands. And I'd like to close with a quote from President Kennedy's famous "We choose to go to the moon" speech from 1962. And he said, "We set sail on this new sea because there's new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one which we intend to win." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. I'm Alan James. It is my honour and privilege to respond to the Minister's comments. This is Europe. Europe has been here for a long time, and as you can see from this shot from the space station, infrastructure lasts a long time. You can see the furnace of the Industrial Revolution in the English North, still burning brightly. You can see the great illuminated corridor of the Rhine from the south up here to the delta. And you can see the super bright area shining brightly where we are. But those areas are currently geographically separate. What happens when we transform Europe? That's what we're going to talk about in more detail today. So, here we are in the Netherlands. Trailblazer, Netherlands. And it is our privilege to be here today. There's a bit of a theme going on here. This is about big stuff. This is about innovation. This is about getting things done. So, literally a few hundred meters from where we are now, you invented global trade. And having invented global trade, you worked out you needed to pay for it. So you invented the stock market and insurance. Another great reason for Hyperloop One to be talking to the Netherlands is that the Netherlands really gets big infrastructure. You kind of have to, because the sea's out there. And you really get smart connectivity. As a global traveler, one of my favorite possessions is the Privium card to get through your customs, your immigration in 45 seconds, as opposed to several hours in a queue. So let's look a little deeper at what those things mean. There's trade, which is fundamentally about innovation. And then there's regulation. How do we set up those relationships of trust that enable the trade and the innovation to happen? Strategic infrastructure delivers transformation, and connectivity is about making connections. There is nowhere else on Earth that has brought all of those things together over so many centuries and delivers the credibility that the Netherlands does. So looking at all of those things together, innovation, regulation, transformation, and connection, how does that fit with what we want to do right now as Hyperloop One? How does that make the Netherlands, or perhaps another location in Europe, there's another smart place, how does that make an opportunity for the European Union? How does that fit with our technological development? So, what's a proof of operations facility? It's 15 kilometers to start with, as the minister suggested, potentially the capability to expand to 50 kilometers. This is the place where we do the optimization of the technology. This is the optimization lab. It's the approvals lab for regulation. This is where we demonstrate how Hyperloop transforms connectivity, and we showcase how we do it. Before we get there, before we start to demonstrate operations, we have to demonstrate the proof of technology. And that's what we're doing in the Nevada desert. Josh will talk more about that. But let's look, what is that? What is our DevLoop? It's the only place on Earth where we can bring together all of the technologies and integrate them that you require to make a Hyperloop work. So, they are the pod in a tube, operating in a vacuum, propelled by a linear motor, levitating under autonomous control. We are the company that is building all of this, and we will prove it over the next few months at our test site in Nevada. Then we move to the difficult stuff, which is about safety case, regulatory approval, multiple pod operations in real time, at speed, 1,080 kmh. Why are we doing it? Not just to make something move fast, but to make something that's transformational, as Rob indicated. This is something that changes the way we think about cities, the way we think about where people live and work, and where jobs are located. So, let's take a simple example. Let's take two major cities, let's call them A and B, 300 kilometers apart. That's kind of London to Manchester, where I come from. And in scale time, this is what happens. We abolish the distance between those cities. We link them in 18 minutes. A high-speed railway will take about an hour and 10. A pendolino on a decent conventional track will take 2 hours and 10. And of course, if you're daft enough to try to drive between two major cities in Europe, it will take you between 4 and 5 hours to do that distance by the time you've got out of the city and parked at the other end. So that's speed. Clearly, Hyperloop is an order of magnitude faster, but being faster is not all that it's about. Because transport corridors are not just about A and B. On any given corridor, the geography is always more complex. You get this kind of stuff going along. You get commuter zones, you have ports, airports. You might want to connect your port to an inland distribution hub. So a Hyperloop One network is a network. Nick mentioned it earlier. It's about taking the fundamental concepts of packet switching from the internet world and moving them to the physical world of moving freight and passengers. And keep your eye on the screen, because this is the difference. This is where Hyperloop is different to previous transport systems. Every journey from every origin to every destination is non-stop. So it's a fundamental degree of flexibility. As a consumer, your transaction with Hyperloop One will be a single tap on your phone. The autonomous vehicle picks you up, takes you to the location of your nearest Hyperloop station. It then becomes your signage and guides you to the appropriate pod, seats you in the right vehicle, doors close. Next time the doors open, you are at your destination. You as a consumer don't need to know what shape the network is. You don't need to know the timetable, because there isn't one. It's on demand. It's responsive connectivity for the way we live and work today. So, proving these technologies at a proof of operations facility, and we look forward to the dialogue with the Dutch government to explore that further, and thank you for the invitation to engage, is when we've proved it as a transport system, what happens when we deploy it over Europe? So here we are today in the Netherlands. Let's just look at a few examples. Let's start with a geostrategic project that is currently high on the European Union agenda, currently known as Rail Baltica. We're asking the European Union not to scrap the railway, but what happens if we build a Hyperloop alongside the railway on the corridor that's being created? The railway gives you Berlin to the Baltics in about 9.5 hours. We do it in 90 minutes. That is an order of magnitude bigger strategic change. Then, creating a Nordic super-region. We've been working in Finland, Sweden, and in the Baltic states now for around about a year and a half. The Nordic capital cities connected to each other within 25 to 35 minutes. A member of the Swedish parliament put it to me really quite succinctly. She said, this isn't about Sweden and Finland anymore, it's Stockholm. It doesn't matter where you live and where you work. Another major EU strategic project, the Tallinn to Helsinki tunnel. Rob mentioned it briefly. If you do it as a train, it takes you 30 minutes and you get twin cities. If you do it as a Hyperloop, it'll take you 6, or with Rob's contingency, 8 minutes, and you get a single city. And then the bit that's of interest here, connecting the European heartlands to the hub, to the gateway. What happens when the dock gates of Rotterdam can be in Denmark? What happens when it's less than an hour from Holland to Berlin? This is about transformational connectivity on a European scale. What happens when you can get from Munich to Milan in 30 minutes? Going under Switzerland, but at the same time using the branching methodology to ensure that Switzerland is actually served by the transport route, not literally undermined by it. And then put it all together, and in maybe 30, 40 years' time, that's what a hyperlooped Northern Europe could look like. a Hyperloop Northern Europe where nowhere on that map is more than 2 hours from anywhere else. That is kind of major city metropolitan area connectivity on a continental scale. Now, clearly, we're not going to build all this tomorrow. We have to start. And we have to start with a proof of operations facility here in Europe that leverages Europe's best-in-world regulatory capabilities. And then expand it to a commercial route on maybe a 50 to 100 kilometer scale. But don't let's lose the vision, because that's what can happen. I want to conclude with just putting it into historical context. What is the scale of the strategic opportunity here for Europe and for us? Sometimes you can't see the future and the present unless you go back into the past. So imagine it's 1829, and imagine as an individual, company, or a country, you've had the opportunity to invest in that. It doesn't look much today, just like the Wright Flyer doesn't look much like an Airbus A380, but this is Genesis. This is the moment where it all kicked off. This is literally the engine that powered the Industrial Revolution. Imagine if your investment didn't buy you a share in a steam locomotive or the factory that built it, but you got a share in the global transformation that followed. If you could lead that transformation. This is the scale of what happens next. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the Industrial Revolution, powered by coal, running on rails of steel, carrying millions of tons of food that enabled mass urbanization and ultimately the consumer economy. That was 1829. That's the world of Brunel and of Stevenson. That's the revolution of the last couple of centuries. It's 2017. The Hyperloop revolution has begun. I'd like now, my great pleasure, to introduce the man who's standing on the shoulders of those engineering giants and making it happen, our President of Engineering co-founder, Josh Geigel.
All right, everyone, thanks for coming. Thanks for Alan. Thanks, Minister, for having us. I want to start with a little bit of a story. Story comes from the term of bloody knuckles. It'll make sense here in a second. As a kid, I come from a family of engineers. My mom, my dad, my sister, my wife. It's really it's quite a mess. But growing up, driving in a car with my dad one day, fan belt started making a noise, and we pulled over, suspected what it was, noticed it was a problem with this little belt tensioner. So we pulled it back into the garage, and underneath the car, had the car up on jacks, looking at it, and was in there with the wrench, pulling apart these pieces, taking the fan belt off, and doing everything. And at that point, I managed to basically scratch up my knuckles to the point there was blood rolling down my hand. And I remember asking my dad, like, man, what idiot designed this? And he said, well, as an engineer, you can redesign what you don't like. And being 12 or 13 years old, that's a pretty powerful thing to have. And so coming to Hyperloop, you have this idea of the same thing with bloody knuckles when it comes to current transportation. You're frustrated, you don't like it. What can you do about it? And here, it's an engineer's dream to really be able to go back to the root, go back to something truly innovative, truly transformative, and take it to the next level. So to do that, we've really created a team, and I believe very much in this philosophy of design, build, and test. And it's very much like a software type of development process, but it's really for the hardware development world. And if you do that rapidly, and you do that rapidly enough, that's how true innovation comes, true change comes. And you have to do that in a really interesting way, because we have a very, very ambitious project. We're trying to build the airplane, the airport, the air traffic control, and the sky. So everybody else had it easy, right? The sky was there. So we had to go out and do that as well. But you have to do that cheaply, you have to do that transformatively, and you have to do it at a performance that doesn't really exist currently. To do that, you need a team. And we've assembled probably the finest team that I've ever been a part of working with. And that's saying a lot with some of the people that I've worked with and that we've put together here. So we've got people who've built cars, trains, airplanes, rockets, spaceships, flying lasers. You've got people who've led the autonomous vehicle program at Google. You've got people who developed the battery technology at Tesla. You have a whole host of people, and they come from all walks of life, all different companies, all different universities in the US, very good ones. And that team is backed up by a team of world-class craftsmen, manufacturing engineers, machinists, welders, fabricators. And they take these ideas that we have and turn them into reality. But that's just it, is that there's a lot more to creating this as a reality. And as Rob said, we're about building things. And that's about why I'm here. I'm not here to do studies. I'm not here to do PowerPoint. I'm here to get my knuckles bloody. And to do that, we've got a team. And when you have a team like that, you unleash them on the world. So our constraints aren't what you can buy, what you can find in a catalog, what you can order from Amazon, or what you can find on a bookshelf somewhere. It's the laws of physics. So Maxwell's equations, Newton's equations, those are our constraints. So we look at them, we understand them, we push them, we probe them, we bend them to our will, we find areas where they're weak, and we really develop new pieces of technology that the world hasn't seen before. And sometimes when that happens, you have to go create methods to test those. So in this case, we had quite a few different ideas for levitation technology, so we went out and had to build a rig to be able to test it. So we created this vacuum chamber that we pull down, and we have our little levitation engines. We call them hover engines, or LEV engines. And those LEV engines allow us to basically test and monitor our performance from the simulations that we create. In 2015 and 2016, we spent a lot of time developing these components. So imagine developing the levitation system, the motor, the guidance system, the control system, all of that, the actual tube, the structure. And we want to actually test that, and we do it again. We've got a little test rig here, but we're doing it on these component level scales. And that component was really taken to the outdoor. We took it outside to do our propulsion open air test, or POAT as we call it, that we did last May. The course of last May, that was our first open one, and we ended up basically extending that, going faster, giving it more control, more variation, and getting it a lot closer to how we'd actually use it in operation. This is what it looked like. It's a beautiful video here. So you see that fly through, and that was really a culmination of quite a bit of testing and development that we had done leading up to that. But the idea behind that was just testing the linear propulsion system or the electric motor. So the simple idea is if I have electrical current and I have a magnetic field, I get a force in the other direction. And by doing that, we tested that whole thing outside, and we took the next design, that was our Generation 2 design, continued to iterate on it, and actually moved through our Generation 8 design, which is actually installed inside the tube currently. So to give you a perspective of how far we've come, again, this design, build, test ethos, this is what the site looked like in September, and we just had started constructing the foundational elements in the desert. So it looks kind of similar to outside. No? Okay. But anyway, this site was brand new. We got it from the local Nevada corridor. And over the course of 10 months, we worked basically 24 hours a day, 2 12-hour shifts. And that allowed us to do this installation. So in November, you see the first tube being installed. And the purpose of this whole test bed was to have the entire integrated test. So Alan mentioned it before. You have levitation, you have guidance, you have propulsion, you have a control system, you have a vacuum system, all tested in one spot. So we're going to use this for years to come to develop the new technologies. And as you see, this is 500 meters long. And we have more development, more innovative technology that gets us closer to the cost point that we want to be at, that we'll continue to build on, to add on, to extend at this. And really, this is our playground. And as Alan mentioned with the proof of operations facility, that's where we get certified. This is where we learn. And that's really important for us to become better and become the company that we think we can become. Ultimately, we have a group of about 150 people that put this together. They worked through rain, sleet, snow, blazing temperatures, freezing temperatures, you name it. It was all kinds of exciting. We even had Marvin out there, our general counsel, out, turning some wrenches when he can. Part of the system is this vacuum facility. So I want to give you some context for the size of this. This is one of the largest vacuum structures in the world. There's a space propulsion facility in NASA, and there's some CERN super colliders that you guys are probably familiar with. And those are the only ones larger than this particular structure. And so we put that together. This is what we've built over the course of the last 10 months. This is the vacuum system that you see here. And that particular the effort, the work that went into this has really illuminated that our initial assumptions and initial projections for how this would work on a production route are actually, we are being too conservative. So we can actually have something that is quite a bit more robust, quite a bit cheaper on the per kilometer basis to maintain the vacuum level. To keep that vacuum separate from what you'd actually see in the main tube, we have a gate valve. So what's this? This is a big door. And you can see it being made at our Metalworks facility, which is in Nevada. This is a nice craftsman machine shop that you can see the beautiful gate valve being made here, and that's off, being basically assembled into the final housing right now. And that allows us to close off the main section of tube, keep that in vacuum, while you load the pod in. So at a station, as you'd walk in, the vehicle would, you'd enter the vehicle, and it would go through one of these airlocks as it went to the main part of the tube. After the tube, we mentioned we have to do and develop these things that haven't existed. So one of the things, as the pod goes down the length, it gets to one-way tube right now, so it has to get pulled all the way back. So how do we do that? Well, we had to go about and build a recovery vehicle, or what we call the pod recovery vehicle, or PRV. And you can see that being made here, but this was developed from a requirement for us to be able to recover the pod 10 times. It has to be able to work in a vacuum environment, has to be autonomous, it has to be able to be communicated with, controlled, and assessed any kind of health signals remotely. So this would work on the moon as a moon tug, if you will. It could be like a tow truck for when your Tesla breaks down on the moon. And you can see it here, but you can see all the different systems on that have to go out and go eventually into the tube. But this is, again, creating something for the need that we have, and very similar to what you'd have for like a maintenance vehicle inside the actual production run. So that 15-kilometer proof of operations facility, you would see this as kind of a sensor cart rolling down and doing that initial inspection, and then, again, maintenance as we have that. So you can see it entering the tube here for some testing that we did on it. One of the other things that we mentioned was the software platform. So we talked about Hyperloop being the connectivity platform, but also it's the high-speed backbone of the future, and to do that, you need what we call the autonomous vehicle interface. And by doing that, you can have all of these different systems, whether it be a vehicle that comes inside the pod, or the transporter, or services, and or freight. Any of those particular items can go inside the transporter and then be shipped across the whole thing. So this is allowing you, what Alan mentioned, to have your phone, click that button, have it come, the Uber come pick you up from the house, either drive you straight into the pod or actually drop you off at the station. And the same can be true for airport connectivity. Imagine yourself being picked up in downtown Amsterdam and actually arriving next at your gate. From there, you can also have the packages or palletized freight, and that can be done in the same transporter here or in its own system. And again, you have the ability to collect all the data on that and then leverage this infrastructure for everything else. So there's quite a bit going on, and the one thing I would really, really hope that you guys take away from this is that this is a team of execution. And change in transportation has been very, very slow for a very, very long time. And it takes teams and capabilities and big ideas to really go out and make it happen. And the one thing that my dad always told me is that progress isn't made by, at the time there wasn't PowerPoint, so progress isn't made by drawing or talking about it. Progress is made by bloody knuckles. And that's what we do here. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Nick. I got you. I don't think
Thank you, Josh. That'll go down as the famous bloody knuckles speech. But that was good. So we're just going to get some chairs here. What we're going to do here for the last part of the agenda is a panel. I really like the framework, actually, that Alan used. I was taking some notes there, the innovation, the transformation, the connection, and the regulation. And I thought that would actually be quite a good idea to use as a framework for the panel that we're about to have, because we've talked a lot about the innovation. You've actually heard from the chief innovator. There were several images there that had never been released, by the way. So first time they've ever been seen. So we've heard a lot about the innovation. So let's move from the theory to the practice. Like, what's it really going to take to make this happen? Because we know that the potential is enormous, but there's several things that need to happen. They need to happen for the very first time, and we need to understand and work together to see, can we make this happen as quickly as the technology is moving. So what I'm going to do is invite a panel up on stage to help me discuss that. And with a bit of luck, the next slide will magically have the name of the speakers. So first of all, let me invite Isabel, Chris, and Risto up, and they're going to introduce themselves first. So please join me on stage. So we've got about 30 minutes. You've got some nice Hyperloop One microphone covers. They're new.
You're all set.
Yeah. Why don't we just start with the intros? And Isabel, start with you.
Right. My name is Isabel Dedring. I work at Arup as of about a year ago, and we are one of the Global Challenge finalists, obviously the best one.
We can't comment on that.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. Carry on.
My previous role was at City Hall in London. I was the Deputy Mayor for Transport. And so, the relevance for me on this panel, I think, is I was involved in creating and delivering a relatively large number of transport infrastructure projects, ranging from cycling infrastructure up to extensions of rail and tube lines. So, how does it really work in practice when you're trying to deliver these big projects?
Okay, now I'm going to make a very important suggestion, which you guys are looking at me thinking, what on earth is he going to say? I'm looking at the slide, and I know that you've sat in the wrong chairs, because if you look behind you, Chris is not Risto, and Risto is, no, that's better. Okay.
Right.
All right. So with that modification, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Chris Brown. I'm a partner with Norton Rose Fulbright, based in London. Throughout my working life, I've advised on major projects, both in the UK but also around the world, both in the energy sector as well as the infrastructure sector, and I presently head up our energy infrastructure and natural resources group in London. And I think my main involvement in this is obviously looking at the regulation and the financing of the projects and taking it to market.
And we're definitely going to go deep on that, I'm sure. And Risto.
Yes, Nick, that was on purpose, just to show that there's mobility on the platform as well.
Good recovery.
First of all, I'm not an engineer, and I'm still excited about this. I'm the chief executive of Finland's Chambers of Commerce, and also run for 15 years now a conference for 100 largest companies in Europe and Finland. But my approach is looking at this from the point of view of non-engineer, and also from the point of view of a potential for a Nordic super region.
All right. And I know you've just released a blog. I'm going to give you a plug for your blog that you've just released on that, which is out there. So let's get going. I talked about the fact that we're going to use the theme of innovation, transformation, connection, and regulation. I think we've done the innovation from a technology point of view. But Isabel, let me come to you first on the subject of transformation. One of the points that I said in the opening, and you've heard actually repeated by the minister, was that this is more than just transportation. It's actually transformation, or transformation through transportation. As someone who spent 30 years in IT, that would have been a bit of an oxymoron for me to think that transportation could actually create transformation. So we talked about society, we talked about people's lives, we talked about smart cities, where you live, where you work. From your point of view, and you've been involved, as you said, in many, many different transportation projects, what's your view on that? I mean, is it truly, potentially transformative at that level?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, probably the biggest problem that the transport industry has is that everyone in transport is really interested in transportation. We think it's great to go out there and talk about trains, tracks, speeds, but most people don't care about transportation. It's a necessary evil to get to work, to visit your friends. And politically, in my experience, the way big projects happen and are successfully delivered and then successful when they run is not by tapping into the transportation story, but talking about what this is going to deliver to the public. So in the case of a project I was involved in London, the extension of the Northern Line, which is one of our tube lines, the whole case for extending it had nothing to do with transport. It was about building 20,000 new homes in London where we have a very seriously constrained housing market. And that was why people politically were prepared to back it, why politicians were prepared to put funding into it. So I think for Hyperloop, a key challenge and also opportunity is to try and change that paradigm, to think about transport not the way transportation professionals tend to think about it, but as an economic intervention, as was extensively discussed, but really tapping into what people really care about, especially thinking about the Trump and Brexit era. What really can this deliver politically that can tap into what the public is really after, which is often not what people like us would talk about and what we would think about. And that makes the difference between, I've been involved in projects that have been crashed and burned spectacularly and those that have been very successful. And the difference is not the spreadsheet about the business case. Some of the successful projects have great business cases, some of them don't have great business cases. It's about a small group of motivated individuals who successfully tap into what the public is really after. And to me, that's a key opportunity for Hyperloop and something that we have to get right.
I don't want to ask the other two panelists here. That was interesting. Pick up on a phrase that you used there. Is that the transportation? I'm probably misquoting you, but something along the lines of "This is not about the transportation planning process,"
right.
Which is interesting in itself. So, Risto, in your experience in Northern Europe, is that the case there as well? Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. You all remember the old Nokia slogan, connecting people. And that was the start, sort of connecting first simple phone calls, but that was only the beginning. It's about networks of creativity and excellence. And I think that as a non-engineer, I look at it, what this technology can do for the rest of the society. And I think that is the argument for going forward, the transformational nature in creating networks of creativity and excellence that go far beyond what we've imagined so far. So I'm totally with you on that.
Chris, any view on that?
I'd still look upon it slightly differently, as not only transformational, but also it's a major disruptor in the marketplace of the existing forms of transport and communication. So I think that in itself is going to be fascinating to see how that plays out. And there's so much change happening. We heard about it in some of the introductory talks this morning. So I would see this as well as being transformational, but also disruptive for the existing modes of transport and communication.
Is that a good thing? I mean, disruption, if you're the disruptor, it's great. If you're being disrupted, it doesn't quite feel as good, does it?
No, maybe not. But I think if you're actually being disruptive and achieving something at the same time by possibly moving the way in which people transport, move freight, move themselves around, but also the way they think about where they live, how they go to work, how they interact with other people, which I think this has got the capability of doing.
Isabel, I want to get onto the subject of regulation, and Chris has already mentioned that you're going to talk about that, especially what Norton Rose do. But in your experience at City Hall in London, I think you were in there, the administration with Boris Johnson, of course, now got a new role. But this concept of disruption, how was that viewed from a transportation planning point of view?
I think the transport industry has successfully resisted many efforts to disrupt it. And I think it's probably one of the best industries in the world at rejecting, foreign thinking and foreign bodies.
And steel rails on steel wheels on steel rails has been with us since 1820.
It's at least 50 to 100 years out of date in terms of basic principles that have come into the manufacturing industry about lean manufacturing, avoiding failure, basic stuff about how you operate the network. None of that thinking really has penetrated most parts of the transportation industry. So I think the issue is for Hyperloop is how do we I think somebody was saying earlier, show that it connects into existing modes rather than it's seeking to supplant them. Now, clearly that might happen over time, but I wouldn't say that's the way to position it. But I would just say that's standard for, a lot of other things in the transportation industry are kind of subject to disruption at the moment. And my experience has been, having worked with lots of, engineers at the underground and elsewhere for a long time, is you just need to keep engaging, persisting, and eventually, with facts, you will, convert them over time. But it's about putting in the hours and the hard graft and the tenacity. You just have to outgrind the machine. And just when you think it's time to give up is usually when they start to crumble.
That's another great quote. We just got to outgrind the machine. I mentioned the Cisco connection, and only because it looks like a network. One of the big things that actually enabled Cisco and others and the industry to grow was the interconnectivity, and we talked about the software standard, and it's a really key. There will be multiple Hyperloop companies. We not only need interconnectivity between Hyperloop companies, we need interconnectivity between different modes of transport, and we need interconnectivity in terms of the application, so you can press a single button and book a multimodal trip. And so we're trying to design the same protocols like the networking industry did into it, but it's going to be a big area. So I want to move on. Let's go to the thorny issue of the regulatory process first. So Chris, I know this is something that you get involved a lot in. We talked about the mobile telephony example, and we managed to get telephony interoperability standards and new regulations. Often the disruptors came from the challengers, not the incumbents. And we talked about, I like the minister's quote about we want mobility to be a service, so maybe we need a single mobility act. That was a very interesting concept. Let's do it differently as opposed to like the rail regulator to regulate this. What's your view on that?
Well, it's obviously going to be a big challenge to do a single mobility act. It would be nice to achieve that in the longer term. I think in the shorter term, you're creating something that's already been put into an existing framework, and that framework is based very much around the existing modes of transport. So it's going to be a major challenge. We know it's going to be a major challenge to bring it all together. But I think people are thinking about doing things in a different way, and I think particularly the European Union and the Commission have been very good at integrating transport across the whole of Europe, and it's quite an achievement. If you've given the large number of countries involved and the different legal systems, etc., they've managed to quite successfully, in a number of instances, bring that all together. And if you look at disruptors, an interesting example at the moment is that of drones, who sort of appeared from nowhere, really. They're basically regulated at the moment on a domestic level, but there's a move now to regulate that across the whole of the European Union. So things can start in small places and in different countries and come together with the right institutions. And it seems very strange as a British citizen standing up here promoting the European Union, the European Commission, but I owe Alan that pleasure.
Some of us still regret the vote.
But anyway, no, I do think that the institutions are there to do it. And I think when things like this come along every so often, it does make people sometimes turn around and look at it in a different way. And hopefully that will be the case going forward.
Risto, do you agree with that? Top-down? EU? It's going to be the EU regulatory top-down? One interpretation of what Chris just said is it's going to come top-down. Is that your view?
Well, I'm not sure. I take your point about regulatory systems, that they have to be developed together with this, but taking issue with this concept of top-down, I think what we have in Europe is a failure of top-down political integration, and we are now in difficulties. So the only way to revitalize European integration is to do it bottom-up and to start by connecting people again, making it easier for businesses and people to connect. So I would say that while I take your point about the regulatory issues, what Hyperloop makes possible is pragmatic bottom-up integration of Europe. And this is what we are looking at in Northern Europe very much. The Nordic prime ministers are committed to making Northern Europe the most integrated area in the world. And all the people support it. 90% of people say, we like this idea. But how to go about achieving it? It's quite clear that we are not going to do it through Brussels. We're not going to do it through creating an institution in Stockholm or Oslo. But we can do it by connecting people. So I think the bottom-up nature of this revolution that can revitalize European integration is something that we ought to be thinking about as well.
Yeah, if I could just come in on that. I mean, I think clearly from my perspective, from a regulatory perspective, it's easier to do it top down. But I would agree with you that I think in some ways it's easier on a sort of political perspective to do it from the bottom up, in the sense you can get people in with sort of shared values and shared locations to come together to promote something which then starts beginning to become a larger system. At that stage it has to become interoperable. I mean, in the UK, for example, we've got the Northern Powerhouse, which has been created, where municipalities and regions in the north of England who've been left out, I think Alan alluded to this before, been left out to quite a significant extent in the economic development of the UK, are now coming together to create transport systems and other ways of sort of working together. So I think hopefully you can get both coming at the same time.
That's sort of what happened with mobile telephony as well, that you had NMT, which was Nordic standard. And then when it was seen as being a good standard, then it was adapted by others. So I think that the first movers who are, if it is Minister here who takes the first step and starts creating the regulatory framework, then it's bound to sort of go beyond just the Netherlands or the Nordics. And in that sense, I see the regulatory system being able to develop also a bit of bottom-up style. I don't know if you...
Let's leave the top-down, bottom-up debate. And I want to ask you about the Nordic super region, because that's very ambitious. But before I do, Isabel, you now, obviously with Arup, and I know one of the things that Arup have said, your colleague John Miles has said, is if you take this issue of, you talked about the Northern Powerhouse in the UK, the growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots, which has political ramifications as well, economic ramifications. But the Arup have talked a little bit about what if you could take the benefits of the London Underground and drop it on the whole of the UK. I don't know whether you want to just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and it relates to this point about the transformational impact that you're describing. The Nordic scheme, for example, is seeking to have, and not to, be tedious. But one of the huge issues that transport projects run up against is transformational economic impact is not something economists like to talk about or quantify. Right. So if Hyperloop's whole business case, it turns on having a transformational impact. So if you look at the Northern Powerhouse, which isn't a powerhouse at the moment, Manchester Leeds, which is very similar to, or could be very similar to, the Rhine-Ruhr region in Germany, where my family is from, but the concept that it could transform itself in that way is something that economists, they're not comfortable with that. They want to put in, 2% growth a year, might be, very aggressive. So getting to grips with that, and actually Hyperloop showing the way in that respect, which goes beyond the engineering creativity, but actually showing a different way of thinking about the economic impact of schemes. So if you could connect everywhere in the UK, like the London Underground, in terms of the impact that it has, the Underground clearly shaped London from its inception 150 years ago. So that's the kind of impact Hyperloop could have on the UK, just as an example, similar to the Nordic impact. A lot of the examples Alan put up, same thing. But you find that very, very difficult to get quantified and accepted by governments as well. But there's a way to do it, but it's extremely difficult. So it's something that I think Hyperloop needs to kind of sort of help to show the way on.
We're going to talk about the financing in a minute, but Risto, we talked about London Underground. We have the Circle Line, and you have a very ambitious. I mentioned your blog. You have and Alan gave a little brief indication of it, but you've been very involved in this idea of creating a Nordic super region. I mean, we're not just talking about connecting airports and ports and cities here. This is very ambitious.
Yes, this is a huge circle line that would connect the Nordic capitals with the heart of Europe. And the way we will look at it is first Stockholm, Helsinki, then tunnel to Tallinn, and then the Baltic Rail add-on, which I think is a marvelous idea, that you don't try and replace something that has been in the works for a long time, but you utilize the Baltic Rail to Berlin, and then depending on whether the Dutch are with us or not, maybe here and then back to Copenhagen. The original idea was Berlin, Copenhagen, Oslo, back to Stockholm, and this creating sort of a new integrated economic area, but also cultural dynamism for people who are, as I mentioned earlier, both politicians and the citizens are very willing to go down this route. So that's the ambition, and that's the beauty of this. It's at the same time as it's disruptive, it's incremental. It's an add-on to existing plans. The Tallinn-Helsinki tunnel is being planned, and the Baltic Rail. So I think the beauty here is that you can have a disruptive technology without disrupting ongoing planning that have to do with updating old infrastructure.
And we talked about the need for interoperability. One of the benefits of being a startup is you can build interoperability from scratch. And in terms of the Tallinn, the Baltic connection, of course, there's a break of gauge anyway. From what you would have to get off one train and get on another anyway because of the gauge issue. So the idea of interoperability through Hyperloop could actually be even a better system than trying to connect two systems together which don't connect.
Yeah, quite. The Finnish railway system was built when we were still part of Russia, so we have a different chord system of rails. So
yeah. So let's go to the big question. You know, the show me the money. Chris, where's the money?
Well, I think, you know, at the moment we're talking about proof of operational facility, and I think that there's quite a bit of money that's available throughout the European Union, for example, for research facilities, university studies. There's a lot of money available under the Juncker plan for start-up technology companies that might be associated with developing this. I mean, clearly, you know, the country, and we're obviously talking very much about the Netherlands here, who develops the proof of operational facility in the first instance, would gain a lot from Central European funds. Clearly, there needs to be a fair amount of government support at this stage, and that's the reason you're doing the proof of operational facility, because you want to be able to demonstrate to the wider financial community that the regulatory regime's in place, the safety cases in place, you can get insurance on board to help with the financing, and ultimately you can attract, you know, the debt capital markets in the longer term and some of the other equity investors once they know that this project really works as an operational facility, and then you can scale it up, which is obviously the longer term objective. And that's obviously a big challenge, but I mean, you know, the European Union in particular has been very good at building major cross-border transport facilities in the past. So I don't see any reason why, if you go about it in the right way, and I think certainly this seems to be the right way in terms of the other major projects that I've worked on, this seems to be the right way to go about it.
In fact, Isabel, you referred to that, didn't you? And you said the line extension, the house price differential, even just within London. I mean, one of the slides talked about from Newcastle down to London, which is probably 5x, 8x house prices. But even within London, you talked about the differentiation and the ability to people to live in North London and connect to London. Yeah. So is that the way the process, do these wider economic benefits calculations, do they get taken into account on major transport?
Yeah, I mean, I think
the time?
The economic impact is one thing, and that's how you make the business case to government.
Yes.
But increasingly around the world, transportation projects need to look more and more at other sources of funding. So you use the fares to help pay for the scheme. You use government cash, but that's drying up more and more. Even places like Asia, where everybody says, oh, don't worry about China, China will just pay for everything. Not the case anymore. Even in China, people are saying, why should we put government money in when the impact is economic uplift for businesses, property values increasing for developers, and all of that value that's created by transportation isn't captured within the scheme itself. So if you look at the Northern Line extension in London, that was paid for entirely through the increase in tax receipts in that area that are expected. So there's an expectation that tax take in that area will go up because of economic activity, and land values, and that is what's used to pay for the scheme. The government's role
the
is
increment gets
only
skimmed off.
the government's role is only to de-risk the scheme, effectively to guarantee the scheme, and a number of government agencies guarantee it, but they don't put any cash in. Crossrail, as another example, is 1/3 government cash, but it's 1/3 fares, and it's 1/3, again, tax uplift. So again, for Hyperloop, if you have the transformational impact on the economy, what you then want to do is actually capture those increases in tax take of a whole range of types to help pay for the scheme, because you will get the sticker shock of, it's very expensive, like all, long distance, whether that's railway or Hyperloop or aviation. These things just cost money. But actually, it's showing that the net cost, not just that you're less expensive than high-speed rail, but the net cost, once you take into account that increase in tax, property values, et cetera, and that's the funding and financing model that we want to be deploying on these projects.
All right, great. We've got about a minute and a half left, so I'm going to spring a surprise on each of you. I didn't tell you about this deliberately. I'm going to start with Risto. I'm going to come this way. 20 seconds, advice. One piece of advice to the audience. If we're going to collectively, the world wants this to happen. It's going to affect 1 billion people's lives positively. The world wants this to happen. One piece of advice, all the different people here are in a position to influence this in different ways. What's the advice? 20 seconds.
This goes to Minister Schulz-Lanhagen. My piece of advice is this: link up with the transport ministers in the Nordic countries and make a case for the European Union to make this happen.
My piece of advice is to just keep on engaging with all the right people you need to make the project work. And I think events like this are a classic example of that, where you increase the stakeholder interest in the project, and that will ultimately allow it to come to fruition.
I think transport projects are always defined, designed, and then we engage with the public. And not surprisingly, often the public say, where did this come from? Doesn't relate to anything I want. So we need to be starting with, what is the problem that the public want us to solve in location X, and then design the scheme around that.
So start with the experience and the benefit to the consumer.
Yeah, I think it might be whatever it is. In London, housing is the #1 issue. So in London, you would make it about housing.
By region.
If, or Brexit is the #1 issue for the UK. So it should be about Brexit in some way or another. And then work backwards into how the scheme needs to operate, how it's positioned, how it's portrayed visually, all those things. It's something we get wrong over and over again. We never learn from our experiences and our mistakes.
Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed the panel. Just before we wrap up, could you please express our appreciation for the 3 panelists. You guys stay there. You stay there. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for attending. We finished perfectly on time. I know there are refreshments outside. As a reminder, the teams are here. You started off by expressing your appreciation to the teams. The teams are all here. They're very excited about their projects, which are featured outside. And my boss wants to add 1 point, so I will introduce him again.
I actually forgot to mention, I apologize ahead of time, I forgot to mention that our co-founder and Josh's co-founder in the company, Shervin Pishavar, was scheduled to be here today. He's been traveling the earth, working together tirelessly to continue to help us to fund and grow the business. Unfortunately, he had an unavoidable personal obligation. He would have been very proud to be here. He has been one of those moonshot leaders that has been very committed to this project. I apologize for stepping in. I should have said it at the beginning, and I know he would have. He's missed being here, but he would have been very proud of today's event. So thank you very much, and I apologize for doing that. Thank you.
Which goes to prove we all have a boss. So with that, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Refreshments outside, teams outside. It's been very, very educational, and we really do believe we're at the start of something extremely big if we take advantage of what's about to happen from a technology point of view and what's about to happen in front of our eyes over the next few months and years. Thank you very much for coming, and we'll talk to you outside.